Well, thanks, guys. So like Dan said, I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I've been there for about 5.5 years. It's been a great adventure. So we're going to talk a little bit about our flow restoration program. The Verde River is one of the last free-flowing rivers in the Colorado Basin. It's a beautiful refugia for native fish. The Conservancy has worked there for more than 30 years. So Dan actually was probably the first Conservancy member out beating his feet around the Verde Valley, so I'm following in good shoes. And you know, our strategy then was different than it is now, but it was about the same thing. It was about preserving the Verde River and all of the creatures that live in it. We talk a lot about fish in the flow restoration program because it's easy for people to think about fish needing water. It's a little bit harder when you talk about southwestern willow flycatchers needing water. We're not quite sure what they would do. They don't perch on the water. They don't swim in the water. So it's hard to articulate how much water they might need. So we spend a lot of time talking about fish. And as you guys were introducing yourselves, I realized that some of you may not be as familiar with the watershed. So I threw in a couple maps here at the last minute. So we're going to look at a couple maps real quick and get oriented. And then we'll watch that video. Because if you have a video about what you do, it's easier than talking about what you do. So we're just going to play the video. So here's the Verde watershed. This is Phoenix down here. This pink area is the Salt River Project Service Area. Here's the river coming in. Here's the Verde Valley. Here's Prescott. Here's Chino Valley. We've got Flagstaff up here. So the Verde has a lot of ecological values, but it also has a lot of social value. It provides water to Phoenix. It provides water to Prescott, Prescott Valley, Cottonwood, Clarkdale, Jerome, Camp Verde. It's a very important water supply for all of those communities. Here's Payson, too, which also gets water out of the watershed. In case you, ooh, this thing is touchy. Okay, that's going to be fun. So just a little more on fish. This is an older map, but it shows you how many native fish species are present in each reach of the river. So 7 to 9 native fish in the upper river. That's where it's not disturbed. There are some, human impacts up there. There is grazing, but there's not irrigation diversions. There's not houses being built. So it's actually a pretty well intact stretch of river that we find a lot of native fish in. Oak Creek, again, it's got a lot of people. It's got probably more impacts than the upper Verde, but it's also got a lot of native fish. This is the Verde Valley through here. 5 to 6 native species are still found. So that's actually still pretty good. You might find 5 to 6 of each of those native species, which is not so good. So there is some questions about how many of those are actually still present and when to stop counting a fish species as present. But just to give you a little bit of a view. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Is there a way to click? There. Okay. This is just a little map. We might come back to this later, but just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about with the irrigation ditches. This is the Verde Valley. It starts up here. This is Clarkdale in this reach. So in Clarkdale, there's a couple small ditches. There's the Brewer's Tunnel diversion. Then there's the Hickey Ditch and the Cottonwood Ditch here in red. And you can see the irrigated lands. This is Oak Creek coming into the Verde Valley, this little spot here. And then this is Oak Creek coming into the Verde Valley up here. So basically these two maps are just superimposed on each other or stacked on top of each other. It's hard to get them shown. We've got the OK Ditch, the Eureka Ditch, the Verde Ditch, and the Diamond S Ditch. So there's about 7 large ditches in the Verde Valley. There's 42 ditches overall. So West Clear Creek, which is a short creek, has 3 ditches. Oak Creek has probably about 12. And there's another 10 or so small ones on the main stem of the Verde. So there's a lot of ditches. There's a lot of opportunities for improving water management with that many ditches. But just to give you an idea of where the irrigated lands are, they fall right next to the river. This is not more than 5 miles in most cases. So the irrigated lands fall very, very close to the river. So most of our project work is right along the river, very closely tied with riparian habitat and protecting those lands. This is West Clear Creek coming in here, just to give you a couple points of reference. So with that, I think we're going to try to watch this video, which will tell you more about
I get out of here?
It's hard being tethered to this thing. No one warned me.
Hauser Farms is one of the oldest family farms here. We've been here a long time.
Hauser and Hauser Farms is a green oasis in a parched landscape. The Verde River cuts a 190-mile path through the desert of central Arizona, supplying water for both farming and wildlife. But agriculture takes more water out of the river than is sustainable. Farmers divert the river into a maze of irrigation ditches, causing entire stretches of the river to run dry.
Water is generally, of course, pretty scarce in the West. There just isn't as much of it. It takes a lot of water to grow food, and so if we can save just a little bit of it to use that water just a bit more efficiently, it frees up water to give back to the river.
National Geographic Freshwater Fellow Sandra Postel and the Change the Course campaign are working with Kim Schonek from the Nature Conservancy to keep the river flowing.
In the Verde Valley, there's enough water for people to use for agriculture, and there's enough water for fish and other wildlife, if we all use our water wisely.
And on the Verde River's Diamond S Ditch, they found a group of forward-thinking farmers whose views about water use are changing.
It's something that we never thought about. When I came here, we just ran as much water down the ditch as we could.
When these ditches were first dug, there was likely more water in the river. And as time has gone on, the river levels have dropped. And now what people are currently taking does become almost everything in the river in the dry season. It's not a functional ecosystem. If you were a fish, you couldn't swim from here to up there. There's not enough water.
When the farmers turned to Kim for help, her suggestion was simple. A solar-powered smart gate and sensor that automatically monitors and regulates the flow of water into the ditch.
This is the control box that has a motor in it that we've used to activate our gate. And I have controls right here that I can raise and lower the system.
Oh, yeah.
Raise and lower the big gate point.
Oh, that's great. And this went in about a year ago?
Yeah, this went in about a year ago. And this is what the Nature Conservancy put in for us. It's really helped us a lot.
Frank sets the gate to automatically adjust to changing river levels and demands from the fields. He can even check it from his phone.
By using this automated equipment, we are able to still provide all the water that everybody needs, but allow some of that water to remain in the river.
And a little more water makes a big difference. During the dry season, the extra water can almost double the flow of the river. The project's been such a success, neighbors have asked Kim for help installing their own smart gates.
Right now we're working a lot with the Verde Valley, but our goal is to really be able to work system-wide.
It's the Verde Valley, but it's the whole Colorado River watershed. It's not just right here. There is the growing realization that we're all swimming in the same soup.
For the water-starved West, the project brings hope. By working together, everyone wins.
Everybody wants a healthy river in their backyard. Farmers do, ranchers do, conservationists do, the community as a whole does. And so coming up with solutions that work for everyone, that do the work of conservation, but continue to do the work of food production, that's really the holy grail. And this project really helped to show how that can happen.
Back at the Hauser farm, it's watering time. the smart gates are part of the family's long-term plan. Not just for their farm, but for their way of life.
I feel extremely lucky to live here. I can't even think of doing anything else.
With the right planning, I can see the Hausers being here a long time.
So that's our video. I'll talk a little bit more as well. If you guys have questions, we could do a couple questions on the video if you have them. Otherwise, we'll jump back into presentation mode.
How much does the solar gauge cost?
The gauges, it really depends on the size of the gate. They run between $5,000 and $10,000. So they're pretty cheap solutions in the big scheme of water management.
What does it actually do? What's the program?
What does it do? All right, let's talk about that. I think that's a good question. All right. Can I just give you that answer right there? It's complex. So let's talk a little bit about how the ditches in the Verde Valley work.
Did it work better with the lights down? Can you?
No.
Yeah. It was no different.
Okay. So here's the river. This is a lovely diagram put together by the USGS. So here's the river. It's flowing downhill. Here's trees that grow along the river. Here's an irrigation ditch that comes out of the river. It takes water out, it comes around, and it loops back to the river. On its way, it delivers water to different farms. It delivers water to what are called laterals. And laterals usually deliver water to multiple sections of large farms, or now they deliver water to housing developments. So if you live in Camp Verde or Cottonwood and you have a nice green lawn, you're likely getting your water off of a lateral, not directly off the main line of the ditch. So we've got houses, we've got farms, we've got flood irrigation, we've got evaporation off of the flood irrigation, evaporation off the farms, evaporation off the lawns, we've got evaporation from the trees, we've got water sinking into the ground from the ditches, from all of the irrigation. That goes in, some of it makes its way back to the river, some of it keeps going deeper and doesn't make it back to the river right away. The time that it goes from sinking into the ground and back to the river can vary from a couple weeks to many months, potentially years, depending on where it is and what's in between it. So we've also got trees growing along the ditch. One thing people instantly go to when you talk about irrigation is let's just line the ditches, let's put them in pipes. That's not always a good solution because these are very pretty places that go through our communities and really build the character of Camp Verde and Cottonwood and Clarkdale, a little less Clarkdale. But being able to see trees in your neighborhood is a really important thing. So our goal at the Nature Conservancy isn't to say, let's be the most efficient and let's always choose the river over anything else. It's how do we balance these demands? You know, how do people irrigate their lawns if that's what they want to do? How do they grow crops and produce food if that's what they're doing? How do we have irrigation ditches that represent the history of the community? I live in Chino Valley. I'm sure some of you have been there. You were probably maybe there many years ago, and it was an agricultural community. There were ditches that went down the side of the road. I live on 4 North, and I drive down 4 North every day, and I see a broken irrigation ditch and dead cottonwood trees. That's not what I envision for Camp Verde. I like the green trees. I like that community feeling. I think it's important to preserve. So that's part of these things is we have to make choices about where is the water going and how is it getting used in the best possible ways. So I think that gives you kind of a little bit of an idea of how the systems work. Water comes out of the river. What's not used by irrigation ends up back in the river. And you heard Frank mention that when he came here in the 70s, you just took as much out as you needed, or you wanted, or what came. The way the Diamond S ditch works is a little different than other ditches. It has a dam. It pushes all of the water into the ditch, and it runs down to where they have a head gate. And at that head gate, there's a side gate, and it pushes the water out this way, goes to the river. So when you saw that image of the water kind of flooding out underneath the gate, that's the water that's going back to the river. The rest of the water is going down to the users. When I met Frank for the first time, I asked him, why is there so much water at the end of your ditch? There's no one down there using it. Why is there 20 CFS coming out of the end of your ditch today? And he said, I don't know. Why wouldn't there be? And I said, well, because there's 5 CFS in the river, and the river maybe wants a little more water. And he said, well, let me show you the head gate. So Frank and I went on a field trip to the head gate, and Frank climbed up on this steel plate and hung like a monkey from a bar above the steel plate and started jumping up and down. And that is how they lowered the gate to put more water back in the river. And I like Frank a lot, so I instantly said, please get off that. You're scaring the crap out of me, man. I can't take it. And so Frank climbed off of that. And I quickly decided that any conversation we had also had to include the safety of Frank and not having Frank fall in that ditch. And that is why we have the automated head gates on the Diamond S, and that's why they went on the Diamond S first. So now what Frank does is tell the gate, I want you to take 25 CFS, or I want you to take 30 CFS. And the gate has a little sensor just downstream, and when it's got 25 CFS, it does nothing. When it's got 26 CFS, it pulls the gate up and returns a little more water to the river. When it's got 20 CFS, it puts the gate down and takes a little more water to the users. So that gate keeps a constant amount of water in the ditch, which was the missing piece. Because what happened before is if the river went up, more water went down the ditch. If the river went down, then they came up and put the gate down because they wanted more water. So there was never a time where they were balancing, hey, this is what we need, so we need to go up and move this gate, because it was terrifying to stand on the gate. So just a little bit of practical technology, in their case, saved quite a bit of water. So the first year we did the gates, it was just purchasing the gates. And they used the gates for the first summer. It worked really well. There were some hiccups to work out. The second year, which is not talked about in the video, we actually had a flow reduction agreement where they're actually compensated for reducing their flow. And so we have an agreement in place for the next 3 years where they will actually get money for reducing the amount of water that they're taking from the river. And it's important that they get that money because as they reduce the amount of water that they're taking, they need to improve their infrastructure so that they can deliver water to all of their customers in the amount that the customers want with less water. So a couple things they've done is install larger takeouts for some of the bigger users. We've put in check structures so that people can get their water easier. So they're working with that money. It's not a, here, take a vacation to Hawaii money. It's money to invest in their system, which they otherwise would not have. These ditch companies are old. They don't have a great financing system. You know, water in the Verde Valley costs under $100 an acre. And you have to pay people to manage water and get it to you. So without a funding stream, they can't make improvements to their ditch. So some of you may not have seen an irrigation dam. I really love irrigation. I think Dan often wondered what it was I was doing in Camp Verde and why did I keep driving over there to look at dams and ditches.
And why coming back all covered with mud?
Right. Why are you sopping wet and 10 minutes late to this meeting? I think that was a question in his mind more often than not. It's still a question that many people ask. So this is an irrigation dam, and this is the Cottonwood Ditch, and it's fairly representative of the ditches. You know, it's a push-up dam in the river. You can see over here is where the water's coming into the ditch. Over here, this is the water that's being left in the river. There's not a really great way. I can't tell you if they did this, it would be better at this dam. There's some things we can do to improve this area, but I don't put this picture up to criticize them in any way. It's just a good example. And this ditch has a nice high point where one can stand above them and take a picture down. A lot of the other ditches are hard to get good images of the dams, but that's just kind of what a dam looks like. So the river below, the river above. What's really cool about our dams, they wash out many times a year sometimes, maybe not this year. But here's the dam looking upstream. So this is what was all covered in gravel. There's the gravel. Here's the low spot. So, you know, this is a fairly functioning winter system. It's not a very functioning summer system. So if you're a fish and you're down here and you're thinking, this is hot and terrible, and I'd like to go someplace where I could swim and maybe breathe, you can't swim up here. And that's true for almost all of our irrigation diversions in the Verde Valley. So what does that end up looking like in a very scientific paper? So the USGS has done quite a few studies that have really helped shape our work and help us focus in on what we're doing. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with this graph, but what this is Clarkdale up here at the 0, the Clarkdale gauge. This is the Camp Verde gauge, so down below Camp Verde, below Beasley Flats. The red line is the flow in the summer. So this is flow in cubic feet per second. So 50 CFS, 100 CFS, 150 CFS, 200 CFS. A CFS, or a cubic foot per second, if you think about a basketball, that's about 1 cubic foot. And that basketball going past a point every second, that's 1 cubic foot per second. So if you can think about 50 basketballs going past a point every second, that's about what this looks like. So the red line shows the flow in the river in June of 2007. So we're coming through here, and then we get to this first dotted line. This is the Brewer's Tunnel diversion, or the Tabasi Ditch. Starts here. And so it takes some water out of the river. And then we get to the Hickey Ditch, and it takes some water out of the river. We get to the Cottonwood Ditch, and it takes the rest of the water out of the river. But like we looked at in that diagram, water was coming back from those laterals. And so those laterals are returning water this whole way, and that's what's causing this increase. And then we get to the very end of the Cottonwood Ditch, and all of the return flows from the Cottonwood Ditch have come back into the river. And the river keeps coming down. We get to Oak Creek, which is the largest tributary of the Verde. There's a lot of irrigation on Oak Creek. We could draw a similar map of Oak Creek. It would look kind of like this. It would have low spots and high spots. But where it comes into the Verde in the summer, it contributes about 25 CFS. And then just below that, so this is Alcantara Vineyard. So if you've been on your winery tours, we get to Alcantara just below Oak Creek, and the OK Ditch takes out, or Thousand Trails. And then we go down, the Eureka Ditch takes out water, the Verde Ditch comes along, and the Verde Ditch is big, it's 18 miles long. It needs a lot of water to get water to the end of the ditch. And they take what's left in the river. They have a head gate that returns water to the river just downstream, so that's that first return right here. And so the flows come back up, but we're still down here in the under 10 CFS range. We start getting return flows from the Eureka, and then we kind of get towards the end of the Eureka, the end of the Verde, and now we only have the Diamond S taking off, and so the Diamond S takes off a bunch of water. So now we get down to under 10 CFS. Some years this is 5. There was one year that I kayaked this, and it was about 6. That was a bad idea. So we get down to the end of the Diamond S Ditch, and they return the bulk. In 2007, they actually returned most of the water they were taking, just because of the way their system was working at that time. And then we keep going down, and we get to the end of the Verde Ditch, and they've returned a lot of water as well. And then we head off into the Wild and Scenic Reach with about 50 CFS. So that's kind of how the plumbing works. So to give you a little idea on the Nature Conservancy, we are trying to prioritize and target specific areas with a long-range vision and short-term goals. So our long-range vision is really that there's enough water for users, but they're using it efficiently, and they're using it in the best possible way, and that there's enough water in the river for fish and other wildlife, and that it's a functioning river. So our short-term goal to get started in that is a target of 30 CFS in the Camp Verde Reach and a 20 CFS target in the Cottonwood Reach. These target numbers don't mean much. They're just to kind of help us say, what are we doing? And what we're doing is not trying to reduce the consumptive use by farmers, because we see down here at the end of the Verde Valley, there's enough water in the system to reach that short-term goal. But what do we do to pull this line up to that? And that's where the conversation about automated head gates and managing your water better come into play. And so we can't just work with the Diamond S Ditch. We also work with the Verde Ditch. We work with the Eureka Ditch. We work with the OK Ditch. We've had conversations in Cottonwood with those ditch companies. We haven't been as far ahead with them. There is one of me, and I have an assistant. And so I feel pretty good about the progress we've made with the capacity that we have. And also keeping in mind that these systems have been taking water out for 140 years. I mean, this all started in 1864 with some people trying to grow food for miners in Jerome. And so it's taken 140 years to get this way. If it takes us 5 to 10 years to get up there, that's okay. So, you know, we're not in a rush to try to rush people who aren't ready to participate. We want to focus on the people who are ready to participate. So back to this fun diagram. So in this example, what we're doing with the Diamond S is we're saying you have a lot of water here, leave it in the river up here. That's a very simple project. Just take the amount you need to serve water to this last user. And that's what we're working on doing. And the next step that we're working on after we kind of get a handle on how the delivery system works is to say, okay, flood irrigation takes a lot of water. And if your field looks like a hill, that takes a lot more water. So we're working kind of to educate people on how much water they might need. You do not need to water your lawn every week. That's really important. You do not need to water your lawn in January. And the ditch, it's not a fence. It's actually a ditch. It delivers water. So there's some things people need to learn about water and how it works. But we also can do things about this flood irrigation. So we're working on drip irrigation, and how do we install drip irrigation? What's the best kind of drip to bring into the valley? How do we use the large users as kind of a starting point, and how do we increase efficiency there? But also, how do we work with these small users? Because recognizing that probably more than half of the water use in the Verde Valley is being used on parcels less than 1 acre. So while it's really sometimes easy to think, hey, there's a large farmer, he's using 300 acres, let me go talk to him about what he should be doing. It's probably just as important to go talk to that person with 1 acre and say, you need to talk to your neighbors, we need to figure out what we can do. But it's very hard when individual users say, I only have 1 acre, what difference does it make? So farmers are infinitely easier to work with than 1 acre homeowners, and I find that a challenge personally some days. Potential improvements, you know, there's pump stations we can use, head gates, diversions, automating head gates, piping and lining sections, retiring unused water rights, taking only amount we need, combining ditches, separating non-compatible uses, scheduled uses. You know, we can add to this list low water use crops. We're experimenting on our ranch in Camp Verde with a native grass planting. And actually Zach Hauser, who you saw in the video there, is farming that for us. We've been doing native grass planting in the San Pedro on Conservancy properties for many years. But we are a great conservation organization and maybe not the greatest farmers. So we really think having a farmer farm native grass will be a much more productive experiment for us. So looking at some of those low water use alternatives as well. And those can be grouped into 2 kinds of transactions. So some agreements are transaction-based. That means you do something and I pay you. Or you deliver X amount of water and I pay you. And that's what the Diamond S agreement really is. I don't tell them you need to do X, Y, Z. I tell them I'd like you to reduce your diversion to this amount. And if you do that, I will pay you this amount. And there's no enforcement other than if you don't reduce your diversion, I don't pay you. I don't have to be up in their business. They don't need to be up in mine. We work well together. It can be done in forbearance agreements. I can say, I would like to fallow this piece of ground this year so that there's more water in West Clear Creek and we can see what happens with the fish. And they can say, okay, and you pay them the amount that they probably would have made off of that crop had they planted it. So those are very simple transaction-based agreements. They are really useful in the state of Arizona. If you were here for Jocelyn's presentation, you heard about how complex Arizona water law is. And you will notice that we haven't really talked about Arizona water law because it does not come into play very often in what we're doing because it's not very useful. So we generally are trying to pay people to do the things we want them to do. We also have some non-transactions-based programs. Water measurement is really key. It's really interesting to put measurement out on a ditch, and we do it very collaboratively. We don't sneak in the dead of night and install a flow meter, mostly because that wouldn't do us any good. If a farmer or a rancher or a ditch manager can't see how much water they're using, it doesn't really matter to them. So giving them some tools like a weir and a weir stick and an online system where they can look online and see how much water they're using has been really cool because that's actually cut their water use very significantly. And in some cases, that's been the most significant water savings we've seen with the ditch companies. We've also done grants to support infrastructure improvement. We worked with the Verde Ditch on a grant from the Forest Service. They installed 5 measuring stations, 4 new turnout gates, an automated head gate, and a bunch of lined sections. With that project, we probably saved over 10 CFS. So really some very good projects can be done without getting too tangled up in water law. So why do people participate? Money, and not money because they like money and they're greedy, money because they don't have money to invest in these systems on their own. These are very old systems that are not very well taken care of. We have homeowners on there that make up the majority of the users. They think paying $100 a year is a lot of money. So you can't ask them to pay twice that in order to upgrade their system. So without an outside investor coming in and saying, this is some money that you can use to improve the system. You know, that's really important. Other incentives, love of place. You heard Zach talk about how much he liked the Verde Valley and how much he wanted to be a farmer. And I think he's a great example of why people are participating in these programs, is they do love the river. No one hates the river. They want to do things they can to protect it and enhance it when they can. Protecting a way of life, it's important to be able to deliver water to farms if you have farms. And we have a lot of pictures of Zach because we spent an entire week filming him. And the first day, I would be honest, the first day he was like, ooh, you're gonna take pictures. By the end, he was like, can we get a reality show? So yes, there's a lot of pictures of the Hausers, but they're very photogenic, so thank you, Brenda. They're a great clan. Publicity, this is kind of funny, but people do really like to be recognized for what they're doing. And I think it's really important that we continue to recognize and acknowledge that the farmers and the ditch managers and the people who are making these choices to participate in these programs make the biggest impact on whether or not we can restore flows in the Verde. Successes, we've talked about a lot of this. There's our little guy installing. Here's the metal plate that Frank used to jump on. Here's the bar that he would hold on to while he was jumping. Here's the chasm that he would have died in had he fallen off of the metal plate. And this kind fellow from Wyoming was the only one brave enough to sit out there with a welder and retrofit that gate. So we try to, count every success and build on them, not to get stuck on things that don't work. We don't spend a lot of time on what water laws we wish we had or what water laws we could have, but just focusing on what can we do and being happy with the results and trying not to limit the ideas that we do come up with. So where are we going? Oh, my little picture went up over the top. So we are working on several fish studies to start thinking about how do we get fish over those diversion dams? What can we do? How do we get people over those diversion dams in a safe manner as well? And so how do we kind of bring along the science that we need? We're trying to work really heavily on improving on-farm efficiency. The last 3 years have really been about how do we manage the delivery of the water in the main line of the ditch. The next phase is how do we manage the water once it gets on farm. And I have to say that's the harder part, so I waited probably as long as I could. And now we need to really jump into that. Using the science that's available and trying to see what science we need to develop in order to design new structures, and then partnering with just about anybody and everybody that we possibly can, because everybody has different ideas and we really need different and new ideas in order to improve flows in the river. And we also need to work with municipalities. One of the big things that was not in that graph, which I actually should add, is a pump. You know, there are a lot of wells in the Verde Valley, and those are taking water out of the system. That's reducing the surface flows. And so what impact does that have on this whole system, and how does that become integrated in with this? And really, people are so very important. So I would end my presentation with just kind of a thank you to all of the partners and the people that make it happen. And private donations are key. The Nature Conservancy is a private nonprofit. Almost all of the work that we've done has come from private sources. We've had the one large grant from the Forest Service for the Verde Ditch, and other than that, it's been private dollars. So we do thank all of our donors, our foundations, Walton Family Foundation, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, the ditch companies, and the farmers for participating and putting up with me, because I'm sure that not every day that I want them to talk to me is a day they want to talk to me. So I really, really appreciate all of that.